Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the World Cement Podcast with me, your host, Alfie Lloyd-Perks, Assistant Editor of World Cement. Today's episode is a little different from usual as it's the first of a two-parter where we take a look back at the closing CCUS panel discussion from this year's EnviroTech conference. With EnviroTech 2026 taking place in London, this year's CCUS panel discussion placed a special focus on projects taking place in the UK, like Hynet and Peak Cluster. To give our audience some real expert insight into both of those, Senior Editor David Bizley took the stage alongside three guests. Rachel Sutton, Interim CEO of Peak Cluster, Tolga Timirci, Head of Global CCUS Projects at Heidelberg Materials, and Tom Redfern, Head of Sustainability at Holcim UK. This first episode includes an introduction to the Peak Cluster project and a discussion around the challenges and opportunities facing CCUS in the UK. I hope you enjoy.
I just wanted to take a moment to remind you to register for World Cement. It's free of charge and gives you access to the latest issues of World Cement, both in print and online. Every issue comes packed full of regional analysis, technical articles, project case studies, and the latest industry news. Simply head over to worldcement.com, click the magazine tab and register today. It's as simple as that. Happy reading. So let's start things off with a few introductions, particularly for our friends from the pipeline side of things. Starting with you, Tolga, tell us a bit about who you are and your involvement in carbon capture in the cement industry.
So as Heidelberg, as I presented, we have lots of projects going on parallel at the moment, different technologies. So today, lots of different suppliers as presented, like Shell, Linde, Polysu. So we are working with all of them in different projects, Air Liquide, and at the moment in Pagewood, we have a FID recently developing that project. We have signed the EPC contract. And in Brevik, Langfurt, Mergelstedt, and the projects are in operations or in the commissioning phase at the moment. So we are developing lots of CCUS projects in cement plants parallel worldwide.
Okay. And Tom, if you'd like to introduce.
Yeah, so it's great to be here. I'm Tom Redfern, Head of Sustainability for Holcim UK. So I'm sure many of you here are familiar with Holcim. We're the part of the Holcim Group. In the UK, we're kind of 200 sites, 4,000 plus employees, but we also have one cement plant at Calden, which is part of the Peak Cluster project, which is obviously an amazing opportunity for us to take decarbonisation of cement to the next level.
And Rachel, if you
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rachel Sutton. I'm here from Peak Cluster. So Peak Cluster is a joint venture that has been set up between 4 cement and lime manufacturers in the Peak District and project developers, Progressive Energy, and some investment from SEAL and National Wealth Fund in order to develop a project which is specifically focused on capturing CO2 from those cement and lime plants, transporting that via a single 200-kilometre pipeline across Staffordshire, Derbyshire, Cheshire and Merseyside, where it connects to an offshore system where the CO2 will be permanently stored in depleted gas reservoirs in Morecambe Bay in the East Irish Sea. For my sins as well, I was also the project manager for the Hynet CO2 pipeline, so I do have some links to the Pagewood project as well. But just to give a bit of an introduction to the Peak Cluster project itself, as I said, this is a very unique project in the sense that it's specifically designed around 4 emitters, all of whom are cement and lime manufacturers, and the pipeline is being designed specifically to transport around 3 million tonnes a year of CO2 from those operating sites to the depleted gas reservoirs. The partnership in the project is really critical here. It gives the project a really low risk and relatively low cost opportunity to target cement for decarbonisation and takes away some of the risk and uncertainty that has come with some of the prior CCS projects in the UK. And we're also working extremely closely with Spirit Energy, who run Morecambe Net Zero, which is the offshore storage project as well. So we really do have an integrated full chain project right from the operating plants all the way through to the permanent storage in the East Irish Sea. What's also really exciting here is the opportunity that the UK government sees in us as well. So because of the importance of the Peak District to cement and lime manufacturing, currently producing about 40% of the UK cement and lime, the opportunity for these plants to be both environmentally and economically sustainable moving forwards is absolutely critical both from a regional and a national perspective. And the UK government recognises this. And they've acknowledged that with an investment of nearly £30 million through the National Wealth Fund into the development costs of developing this project. So we really see the benefits of this, both from an industrial strategy perspective, as well as a sustainability and a decarbonisation perspective as well. And it's worth saying that these cement and lime partners are really key employers in the region as well. So there are many reasons for making sure we protect these industries moving forward, achieving net zero being one of those. The depleted gas reservoirs in the East Irish Sea have a capacity of about 1 billion tonnes of CO2. So we have plenty of CO2 storage capacity there, and there is potential for further expansion of that project as well. So it's really exciting to see this part of the project being the kind of emitter base load, making sure we have those anchor emitters in place so that we can get away with a really exciting project here. And we're delighted to be working with Holcim, but also with Buxton Lime, with Breedon and with Tarmac to get this project away.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Tom, starting with you then, and sort of following on from what Rachel was talking about, what do projects like Hynet and Peak Cluster tell us about how ready the UK cement sector is for large-scale carbon capture?
I think the UK cement sector is ready. I think the cement sector as a whole is ready. We're seeing that, and we're seeing it happening already at cement plants in Europe, where carbon capture is happening, and it's real. We're seeing it happening already in the UK, and we believe that we're in a good position with scalable technology to make most of this and take full advantage.
And Tolga, your thoughts on that?
UK is definitely ready. So we are also bringing our know-how and lessons learned from other parts of the projects in Brevik, in Edmonton, Canada, or in Germany, so that we are bringing all these lessons learned here. And in UK, the contractor setups and contractor combination is really good. Strong contractors, technology providers, construction companies. So UK is ready to execute those projects, definitely. So we are very confident.
Okay. And Rachel, touching on some of the things you brought up in your intro, then how important was the cluster-based approach to making carbon capture viable for producers in the UK? Would it even have been possible without it?
Certainly not in the first few clusters to get away. Clusters enabled large-scale infrastructure to get away at a low-risk perspective. It would be extremely difficult to justify spending the amount of DevEx and CapEx required on the pipelines and on the store. I mean, these stores are huge investments for a single emitter. Whereas if you can cluster a number of emitters together to make sure that you have optionality in terms of which to choose to progress with their capture facilities, that really de-risks the project. And most importantly, it means that you can aggregate large volumes of CO2, which brings down your levelized cost. And fundamentally, that's what we're trying to achieve here is a low-cost option for industry to be able to decarbonize. Although we're here talking about cement, having these cluster approaches also means that you get a spread of different industry that you can unlock decarbonisation across. So you're not depending upon a single market to drive these projects forward. So cluster is absolutely essential. And I also think it's really valuable in that it enables collaboration between organisations that may not historically have collaborated. And bringing those organisations together allows pooling of resources, reduction of risk, and shared experience. It means that you have an opportunity to learn from each other, to build shared capacity and capabilities in these sort of technologies. What it also means is that you can speak to government on business models and economic models with a single voice. So you can speak as an industry saying this is important to us in order to enable our decarbonisation. And that voice is less powerful if you've got a single company.
Tom, I think you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, echo many of Rachel's points. I think it's completely unique to bring competitors together in this way to have a shared goal, but that shared goal is also the reality. There's no one company, there's no one industry that's going to deliver net zero or tackle climate change. So the clusters give a completely unique way to come together to have a shared goal, which is to be net zero.
Okay, excellent. And Tolga, would projects like Padeswood have been feasible without the cluster approach, or would it just been much more difficult?
I mean, it will be impossible. So without cluster approach.
Okay.
Because you need to have the sequestration pipeline in place. And with the cluster approach, you are collaborating with the different companies from different industries. So you're learning from those companies as well. So our technology provider and EPCM contractor also working with other cluster emitters, which is supporting our project indirectly. So this is a very relevant model and supporting our project, and it will be impossible without this cluster approach to execute this project. I mean, from funding point of view and from the pipeline connection point of view.
And sticking with you just for the moment, Tolga, but obviously feel free to chime in. Both Hynet and Peak Cluster depend obviously not only on the capture technology, but things like pipelines, storage, permitting, and public support. Yeah. Which of those sort of non-plant factors is the hardest to get right, and I suppose is which is posing the biggest obstacle?
All of them, I can say. You cannot make it one. Because in UK, the permits are really taking a long time and it's complicated. So even I can give you one example. I mean, we have found one bed species on site and it's giving extra times for us for the extra permits, ecology, to look for the ecology types, etc. So all these things, pipeline connection, interface with the pipeline, getting the CO2 quality, the right specification, agreeing with them, with the cluster, with the pipeline operator. So these are really taking a long time. And what we see is that we don't have concern about the project itself, I mean, from the carbon capture technology. But all the other things, when you add all the things, all the non-plant or the outside effects, that's making the complication more and more. But until now, I guess it's managed well by all the parties, so that we are there.
And Rachel, from your perspective?
Yeah, if I can come in on that, I always say that the engineering is the easy part of these projects. Hopefully the technology is not that complicated. Obviously, there are always opportunities to find new efficiencies and there are challenges at implementing them at scale, but that's not the big challenge that these projects face. Engineering is reasonably manageable. One of the big challenges is that all of these projects are public and private partnerships. It needs both to come together. Industry need to be involved, but it's also heavily dependent upon government policy and the regulatory and economic models that come alongside that. And there are always different factors pulling these projects in many directions. If I can give one example, political will for net zero is one of the primary drivers for these projects. And as I'm sure many people in this room will be aware, that has fluctuated somewhat over the last sort of 4 to 5 years. And keeping these projects on track from a delivery perspective while dealing with the vagaries of global politics is a real challenge. And public opinion comes along with that as well. These projects are being developed as nationally significant infrastructure projects, which means we have development consent orders, which are determined at a Secretary of State level. But fundamentally, we have to bring the public along with us. We need their trust and in the projects that we're developing. And equally, public opinion will sway the direction that politics takes as well. So as we see shifts in public opinion away from the prioritization of net zero, that remains to be an ongoing challenge in terms of driving forward the business models to get these projects away. So I think to go back to your statement, all of these factors are so interrelated. And when you think you've resolved one of them, another one pops up somewhere else. So that is the big challenge of these projects. It's not the engineering, it's the driving them through project delivery, through the global environment that we're working in.
And Tom, you wanted to...
Yeah, I agree with all of the points. We're definitely entering a bit of a period of increased kind of climate skepticism, people under a lot of other pressures, and perhaps where a few years ago was more of a public support and back of this, perhaps seeing a bit of a softening of that at the moment. I have no doubt it will come back. I certainly hope it will. But also when we talk about things like the Peak Cluster, that also comes with a pipeline that's 200 kilometres, and that does have an impact on local communities that feel quite far removed from cement production, cement manufacture. So there's a lot of work for us to do to be open, transparent, build that public trust. And we need to see this as a collaborative, not as a Peak Cluster, not as a Holcim, not as a Heidelberg. This is kind of a united project.
Okay. And expanding briefly, we'll come back to the UK in a moment, but the broader cement industry generally, Tom, how important is things like shared transport and storage infrastructure going to be for making carbon capture viable across the board? Is this a global issue facing the industry?
I think it's vital, isn't it? And we've already talked about how just having 4 competitors come together to help make the storage and transport and storage viable is great. But we need to do that more, and we need to see other industries coming in. So over time, as it scales up and other industries could do their own capture and storage and use the same transport and use the same storage, that's going to help scale up, and also help everybody deliver that shared goal, which is to achieve net zero. We need to keep going back to that point. Why are we doing this? And it's to get to net zero. And that's not just cement, that's other industries as well.
Okay, excellent. And for you, Tolga, in the case of Padeswood and I guess the wider Hynet system, what do you see as the biggest lessons that you've learned so far about integrating a cement plant into a broader industrial decarbonisation network?
And first of all, the cement plants, carbon capture plants are chemical plants. So cement plants are not continuous plants. So the integrating from cement plant to a carbon capture plant is a challenge. On top of that, from your carbon capture plant, giving the CO2 to the pipeline is another challenge, because you need to agree with the CO2 specification with the pipeline operator. You need to align on the timelines, because each companies have different FIDs, different timelines, different schedules. So you need to align all these schedules to make sure that when you're ready to put the CO2 on the pipeline is ready, or pipeline should not wait 5 years for you to put the CO2 in place. So you need a close collaboration with all these stakeholders to make sure that you align with the technology, you align With the interfaces, you align with the pipeline, and these multiple FIDs are coordinated well by the government or institutes or the cluster to make sure that you start consequently all the projects. Otherwise, you keep waiting the others,
Right.
which makes the complications. Increase the complications.
And Rachel, from your experience on Hynet, does that ring through?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree. It's aligning with the single system. So a little bit of background to how this works from a kind of regulatory perspective. That all of these, that the Hynet but Peak Cluster will as well, need to operate under a network code, and that defines a lot of how the emitters and the CO2 pipeline itself and the storage facilities will interact. And negotiating the terms of that network code relies upon a large number of parties, all with slightly different interests. Fundamentally, the driver is the same for everyone, but everyone's coming from a slightly different situation, and aligning all of those parties through a negotiation period to come up with a single network code that works for everyone is not a straightforward thing to do. It's a fantastic achievement that has been managed for Hynet and for East Coast Cluster already, and Peak Cluster will shortly be going through a very similar process to make sure that everyone is agreed on how that's going to work. But it's worth saying that this is a first of a kind network code. We have network codes for the gas networks in the UK today, and they've been around for decades. This is for an entirely new regulated system. It was not an easy thing to develop, and it will continue to evolve over the coming decades as more and more projects come online. But that's just one example of where bringing everybody together to find a single solution when everyone's coming from a slightly different perspective has been challenging, but also a phenomenal achievement to get to the point where we've got something like that signed off.
Okay, excellent. And Tom, going back to you. Now, Peak Cluster obviously brings multiple cement and lime producers together around a common infrastructure. So following on the same lines of what I asked you earlier, does the kind of collaboration we're seeing in Peak Cluster and I guess Hynet as well represent a one-off response to the local circumstances of the UK? Or is this something that we should expect to see repeated elsewhere?
I think and I hope we definitely expect to see this repeated elsewhere. Of course, Peak Cluster presents in some ways a unique opportunity, but we are a cluster of cement plants in quite a small geographical area driven by geology. It's a perfect place to make cement, and therefore the cluster comes together quite nicely and quite obviously on a map. I think as we go forwards, we'll see other people join clusters, and clusters will hopefully grow, where that makes sense. But I also hope that over time we see other industries coming together to form their own clusters. It might not just be cement producers. It's not always impossible to have 4 cement and lime producers cluster. It might not make sense, but we should look to expand that model out, and as Rachel said, take benefits of the economies of scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is also an area where the UK can continue to develop through non-pipeline transport as well. So yes, there is a significant advantage to those clusters of industry who happen to be relatively near to geological storage. They get that advantage going straight into the BAT. But there are non-pipeline transport options for transporting CO2 by road or by rail, which allows some of those more satellite clusters or even individual sites to have a process for getting their CO2 away and stored. So we aren't there yet with the UK, but we are starting to see progress exploring MPT models. And I think that will perhaps start to unlock more mini or satellite clusters as well.
Okay. And obviously we have a question coming from the audience, but I just want to go to Tolga first. Now, Hynet and Peak Cluster are often discussed in terms of emissions reduction, and that is the end point of them. But they're also industrial strategy projects, which sort of Rachel touched on in her introduction. How important is that argument about protecting domestic cement and lime production when it comes to winning support for carbon capture as an investment?
Of course, support for these projects are really important. Funding support, because at the moment, without those supports, you don't have the business cases available. So this is at the moment crucial. But when in the future, when the policies becomes clear, the procurement processes in the public procurement become clear, and there are different mechanisms, then maybe we were looking for different mechanisms. But at the moment, this support is crucial, what I say.
So let's move to this question then from the audience, which I think I will direct towards you, Tom, and Rachel as well, because it's Peak Cluster focus. And now, what are the carbon capture technologies selected by Peak Cluster emitters, and what criteria are you basing that on? And are there possible integrations or synergies between the 4 emitters?
Short answer is we haven't selected technologies yet. We're still in pre-feed, hopefully towards the end of pre-feed soon, but obviously that's shaped a little bit by a few things. A massive contributory factor for us is energy demand. We're up in the Peak District. They use a lot of energy and a lot of electricity. So we have to have a technology where we can get suitable energy supply into that, and also water and water availability, depending on the technology you choose. Some have massively high water demands, and we don't have access to unlimited amounts of water again in the area. So I think that's it. I'm talking from particularly a Holcim perspective. There's perhaps opportunities for greater synergy between the emitters. I think at the moment we're probably very much looking at our own specific local circumstances, our own specific business models, and hopefully perhaps that might come as the project progresses.
So we are fortunate because this is a joint venture and the cement partners are all meeting together extremely regularly. We do have the opportunity to explore those synergies. It is still extremely early in the engineering design, so there's a long way to go in terms of technology selection. But the project is perfectly positioned to make sure that we do exploit any of those synergies that come out. I think it's probably just worth touching on that difficult balance with all these projects as to risk versus reward when it comes to choosing a technology. There are some very well-established carbon capture technologies out there, and there are others which are more emerging. There may be some significant energy efficiency opportunities and the like with some of the more emergent technologies. But these projects, we need to lower the risk and we need to lower the cost. So there are often a lot of drivers to make sure that we're choosing an established technology. We have confidence we can get it away. There will absolutely be time for newer novel technologies. And I don't want to speak on behalf of the capture plants themselves as to what's going to be selected, but it is always that balance between making sure we get something that we have confidence we can get away at a low cost versus trying to drive an exciting new novel technology.
Yeah, and this is also, got to remember, we're also part of global companies, and our companies aren't just looking at carbon capture technology in Peak Cluster or in this cluster, they're looking at technologies to scale up across Europe and the rest of their portfolio. So sometimes we might be looking at something that works for Holcim here and across the wider Holcim group. I'm sure Heidelberg might be similar, so it won't always be common ground.
Yeah. So I'll start with you, Tolga, to wrap up this section on UK-focused projects, and we'll go to some questions from the audience about that. Do you have a wish list from the UK government in terms of policies or support that you'd like to see continuing to help the development and eventual success of these projects?
Yes, we have a long list, but the first one should be, the policy should be clear and should be on time. This is very important. And the other point is that we will have a product at the end of this project. So it will be a green cement. And if you don't have a client for this green cement, then it will also for the industry as for Holcim. So this project won't be attractive. So there should be also a mechanisms in place for this green cement to be procured in public procurement in infrastructure projects or in the specifications. And as mentioned, for the permits, so these projects needs a little bit, let's say, extraordinary attention, maybe, to lower the permit timing. Otherwise, we are fighting with very tight schedules to realize these projects, and we are stuck with very small things, but it has impact on the permit, then it affects our timeline. So maybe some support on those will be very helpful for those projects.
I saw both of you nodding along to that. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think one of the challenges we have with CCS clusters now, and Hynet and East Coast Cluster have been extremely fortunate in getting away through the cluster sequencing process. And I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that the UK government did do a brilliant job getting those away. For some of us living and breathing it, it was hard work. But we've got 2 CCS clusters away in the UK, and that is an extraordinary achievement, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. Of course, now we've proven we can do that. Then it's come on, right, what's next? How are we going to scale this up across the UK? Peak Cluster is absolutely in the forerunning. We also have Acorn and Viking in the UK as well, who are all clamouring to be next in line. And the bit that we're missing at the moment is what is the process now for getting those 3 clusters away? We have attractive projects. We have good strategies to get through the engineering and consenting. It's getting to financial close now with the economic models that we need from government to achieve that. We have a big focus for Peak Cluster specifically on trying to get ourselves off government balance sheet to reduce the cost to government and to make it as much of a merchant model as we can. But we still need to work closely with government from an economic model and a regulatory model perspective to understand what that's going to look like. And bringing all of those strands together in a timeline that suits all elements of the public and the private sector is an ongoing issue. We work extremely closely with DESNZ to make sure that we keep that aligned. But as always, there's a desire to move faster because these projects are investing a lot of money now, of their own money, and need a level of confidence that there is a line of sight to getting to financial close. You don't need confidence that money is coming today, but we want to understand what the process is going to look like as to how we get there. So continuing to engage with DESNZ just to start working through that together it's our biggest ask.
Policy certainty. I think we find ourselves in a bit of a not unusual, bit of a weird position now where, as Rach said, we've actually done it in the UK, and we've proved it, but we don't have still yet that clear framework to go through to give certainty to our parent companies to invest money. You've got to also remember that we're in competition with other projects across the portfolio. So if they feel like there's more certainty in another project versus ours, that's clearly going to become more attractive to them. So it's really important that the government give that clarity and actually build on what they've already done, which is actually an amazing success story and something we should be proud of.
Okay, excellent. That kind of depletes my questions about the UK side of things. So we'll move to some from the audience. Now, if you can't talk about pricings and things, that's absolutely fine. But let's see how this goes. What is the CCS levelized cost pound per tonne of CO2 sequestered at Padeswood and Peak Cluster? And what makes it competitive compared to other cement carbon capture projects? Who would like to have a go at that?
I'd like to touch on the cost, how we calculate the cost, because with one of my discussions with the business guys, I realized that they were not looking for always the lowest cost. They were looking for the accuracy in the cost.
Right.
And what we have done in the last, for Padeswood projects, in the last 3.5 years, we have done a double pre-feed and then very detailed feed. It was above the industry standards. Engaged with the market, 95% of the cost have been tendered during feed. And we have done engagement with the construction companies to make sure that we have the right cost. And because this is the taxpayers' money, it's not our money. So we have to be very careful with that. And what we have done at the end was to show that this is the cost that we can build this plant. And I think that makes the project competitive. It's not always lowest price, but the assurance that this price we can build with the plant.
Okay, excellent. And Rachel?
Yeah, and I can pick up from that. So unfortunately, no, we can't can't tell you the pounds per tonne abatement cost of CO2 here and now. We're still extremely early in the process. So even if I did, it would be subject to change tomorrow. But I think it's worth saying that I absolutely agree with what Tolga said. And certainly for those first clusters, cost accuracy and therefore confidence in the cost to deliver is really important. For Peak Cluster, it's slightly different. There's been a significant level of subsidy coming forward from government for those first projects to get away. We can't depend upon having that forever moving forward. So our focus is starting to really drive down the costs, and we intend to be a lower cost project than Hynet or East Coast Cluster. We need to be, and we also need to look at alternative funding models that aren't purely subsidy from government. So that is one of our big focus areas moving forward, is making sure that we start to forge the pathway to taking these projects off the government balance sheet and finding a way to bring them into a merchant model.
Tom, and did you want to add to that?
Yeah, there's not much to add. It's far too early to give a pounds per tonne numbers. Rachel said it'll probably change tomorrow, but we're confident that through the power of the cluster and for having a dedicated pipeline with a really good carbon store with a backer that's absolutely committed to it, that we can deliver good value compared to other projects. But clearly that's going to be worked through as we go through the project.
I've just that one thing. So one of the reasons that we believe Peak Cluster can be lower cost is because it is a system specifically designed around those 4 emitters and a pipeline going from A to B with future expansion opportunities, but that base project is very clearly defined. Some of the earlier projects suffered a little because through the cluster sequencing process, didn't actually know which emitters they were connecting to until after the pipeline had gone through the consenting process. So it added in some rework, some abortive costs and the like. By being a really targeted core project, we've got the opportunity to mitigate those. And equally, we have the opportunity to mitigate the cost of risk. We're not the first project going, so we can drive down risk allocation as well.
I hope you all enjoyed the first half of this special 2-parter episode. Stay tuned for part 2, which sees our panellists take questions from our combined EnviroTech and World Pipeline CCS forum audiences. And as always, if you like this episode, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Goodbye for now.
I just wanted to take a moment to remind you to register for World Cement. It's free of charge and gives you access to the latest issues of World Cement, both in print and online. Every issue comes packed full of regional analysis, technical articles, project case studies, and the latest industry news. Simply head over to worldcement.com, click the magazine tab and register today. It's as simple as that. Happy reading.